I believe we've gone live. Yes. Good. Hello, everyone. I'm Indira Chandrasekhar, and I am the editor of this wonderful anthology that we're going to be talking about today. Oops, let me position it right so you can see it. There you go. And it is hosted by the lovely Champaka bookstore. How we'd have enjoyed sitting in their cafe and chatting live and eating their lovely confectionaries and drinking chai or coffee. But unfortunately, it's COVID time. Furthermore, they've had some difficulties with in technology, and so they are not able to actually introduce us. So we are going to introduce ourselves. So I'm in conversation today with Anjum Hasan and Fehmida Zakir, and I'm really, really pleased. Thank you both for being here. Yeah, and I think I think some of you might have seen also on the notice that went out, the announcement that Kuzhali Manickavel is going to be on the session, but unfortunately she couldn't make it. So you'll have to make do with these two wonderful ladies, and I'm sure you'll be more than happy. Now, we've had all kinds of exciting technical glitches. Anjum has returned to the basics and is sitting in candlelight. Fehmida seems to be doing okay in Chennai, so yeah, so we'll have this conversation. A quick introduction to both Anjum and Fehmida, who are both authors in Outer Print magazine, which I'll tell you all about in a minute. Anjum Hasan is a novelist, a short story writer, a poet, and a critic. She is the author of several works of fiction, and the latest is A Day in the Life. You can find out more about her on her website, www.anjumhasan.com. Fehmida Zakir is also a writer, obviously, an independent writer and a translator. She's published in numerous journals in India and abroad. She's also one of the editors at the Bangalore Review, presently looking at non-fiction submissions and prose translations. Her short story collection, Keeper of Secrets, with which I have a small part in the journey, is coming out shortly from Dhawli Books. My name is Indira Chandrasekhar again, and I am a scientist and a writer, literary curator, and the editor of this marvelous anthology, which I hope you'll all buy. It could be available on the Champaka bookstore website, www.champaka.com. So the way we're going to structure the evening is that I'm going to just give you a small introduction to the anthology and to Outer Print, the magazine, and give you a sense of why I started it, probably tell you a little bit about the structure of the anthology. And then we will talk to, I will talk to Anjum and Fehmida, who will respond to the anthology and then talk about their own stories at the end, their own work, really, their own writing. Both of them are sensitive and fine fiction writers, so it's going to be quite a treat. Yes, so the anthology, I thank Westland Amazon and Context, my publisher. It is such a delight to have been able to bring it out in its 10th year. I started Outer Print magazine, as many of you may know, 10 years ago, yes, of course, but also very much motivated by my own need for a place to publish my work and to have an edited platform for short stories. I had started writing short stories after living abroad for many years, and returning to India had just sort of awakened this need in me to tell all these stories, and looking for a platform. At that time, there was a sort of a particular dearth of short fiction places for publishing short fiction. So I started the magazine. I started it as an online platform, and I'm going to read very briefly, instead of just repeating what I've already said. I'm going to read very briefly from the introduction to the anthology. And in it I say, from the beginning, I was clear that the platform would be online and take advantage of the wide reach that the internet offered. We decided not to monetize, so we would bear no awkward obligations to sponsors, and only engaged with donors who respected and indeed supported our autonomy. The design on the site was considered as well and aimed to highlight the writing with minimal distraction. So basically, yesterday Bachi Karkaria asked me why I called it out of print. And basically, it was in a sense because we are taking the print model of a published page and just taking it online, And so we were going out of print. Now, we were not really exploiting other aspects of the web, like creating, changing stories that could modify and take different narratives at the press of a button. Maybe that'll come in time. We did think about it, but at that point, it didn't really seem what we wanted to do. Now, the anthology contains selected stories from the magazine. And of course, I wanted to publish pretty much every story that we had in the magazine. But when you go into print, you have various restrictions on size and page count and all kinds of things. And so, along with the wonderful editors at Context, we made a selection of the stories that we would publish, leaving out many dear favorites. But of course, because they're all available on the platform itself, on the online platform, they are accessible. And this, in a sense, is just a symbolic representation, perhaps, in print. Oh, I keep missing the camera here. In print of this, of the collection in the magazine. I just want to tell you a little bit about the way the anthology is structured. We have 5 sections. And instead of telling you my logic behind the 5 sections, I'm just going to read a little excerpt. Each section has been commented upon by a different writer who's had some connection to the magazine or to me. And so I just want to give you a little excerpt from each of their comments, which will give you an idea of the way in which the magazine is structured. So the first section is called Making the Myth My Own. And the comment is by Sangeeta Agni. As many of you know, she's a writer who has a connection to retelling myth and to putting the myth into contemporary space and time. The stories in this section are exciting and subversive, a testament to the enduring nature of myth to continue to shape our narratives. They demonstrate the power of myth to hold many meanings, voices, and perspectives, and in doing so, leave space for future generations to inscribe their experiences and voices onto those age-old tales. So that was just gives you a sense of the stories we have. Really, they're quite remarkable, I have to say. So exciting. The next section is called Angle of Incidence. Is my vision of myself an illusion? And the
Fehmida, I think we've lost Indira.
Yeah.
Can you hear her?
Yeah. I think we have lost Indira. Yeah.
So maybe we should talk a little bit while she sorts out her issues. It may be a power cut or the net may have.
Yeah.
So, would you like to comment on the anthology? I think you would be better placed because you're an out-of-print writer. From a very early edition of the online magazine, weren't you? Which edition?
I've had 2 stories in out of print, and one was in the gender and violence, sexual violence issue, and one previously I forget what was the issue. And there was also a DNA out of print short story competition. So one of my stories was made it to the long list. And so I have 3 stories that sort of came out that have a connection with out of print. And as Indira was saying, the anthology has been divided into sections, and a different writer has given their impressions about the stories in each section. And I found that very interesting because the writers were giving, talking about what that particular section was, outlining, and what the stories meant to them. And there is this thing about oracles and about the meaning of place, and Rakshanda Jalil has talked about reality, the stories that are rooted in reality, and um, and all of them were also mentioning how even though the stories are by different writers from different periods of time and from different geographies within the Indian subcontinent, somehow they all seem to have a thread running, which is either obliquely related to whatever the topic was, or directly, and in it that they all had some meaning in being connected together, and I found that very interesting.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
it's
also, yeah.
oh, there she's back. Yay.
Hi,
So
I'm so sorry.
not at all. I was just asking Fehmida how she feels about the anthology because it's presumably easier for her to respond print writer, but not in the anthology. So seeing it
Yeah,
as a reader,
yeah,
and she was just saying that the sections are very interesting to her.
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
But we were interrupted talking about those sections, and maybe you need to say a little more about that because they're not strictly thematic, but um, there is an idea of bringing things together around, let's say, broad ideas or
yeah,
metaphors that might be running through stories and organize them that
yeah,
way.
yeah,
Go
Yes.
on, Indira. Yeah.
Yes, indeed, very much so. So they're not literal at all. They're
yeah,
really a way of holding together a set of stories with an idea that's maybe just in our minds. But I think they have a coherence.
yeah,
The angle of incidence is my vision of myself an illusion, is the second section. And Janice Parriott says, we begin and end with water, fundamental, fickle, forged by mystery. The first, a lake into which a young woman gazes, looking to drown. The last, a river over which a bridge joins an old life to the new. Where does it lie? The self we seek to uncover, to discover, to conjure. Fiction allows us a veritable changing room of options. That dish, that dress, the long, long look in the mirror, that other on whom we hinge and unhinge who we are. We find the performance of self is never complete, and how often in this play we fail to keep up. We bleed as the housewife, we lust for whom we must not, we wait for signs, we watch the shape of ourselves changing, incanting, this is who we are. And yet fiction will always return us to the same question, who am I? And so these stories are here. I won't list the authors. You can buy the book and have a look. And the next section, did either of you just want to respond to this straight away instead of my rattling on?
Yeah, but maybe in some sense it's better if you rattle on
Okay.
because I kind of scrambled the order when I was reading. I didn't really proceed section by section or
Yes.
even really take in the little introductory notes to each section.
Yes. Yes.
So maybe sort of interestingly opposed to what Fehmida is saying, my experience of the anthology was quite different because I read each story
Yes.
for itself, and
Yes.
I haven't read every single one. I've read maybe half the book,
Oh, yes. Oh,
or
that's impressive.
maybe two thirds. But
Mhm.
yeah, but I had a few ideas generalizing from that experience of reading it just as a book of stories rather than a
Yes.
thematic anthology. But maybe you
Yes.
want to finish
Yes.
talking about each. Yeah.
Yes, yes, certainly. Yes, oh, that would be very interesting because, in a way, that is how I often end up reading books and then go back to their structure, anthologies rather, or collections, and go back to their structure afterwards. So that would be an interesting point of discussion. In any case, as I say in the introduction, no anthology can be complete without stories about love. And this next section is called Oracles and Beating Hearts. The comment is by Sharanya Manivanan. And she starts, "The beating heart is a kind of baggage too. We carry it everywhere, and it both talks to us and tells on us constantly." As Annie Zaidi writes in the story entitled Sujata in this section, which has a heartbeat quickening pace and a protagonist finds herself hunted down by her longtime abuser, if your life isn't confined by place, then how can it be changed by leaving a place? You just have to wait it out, and when this time is past, you will see that you have moved on, carrying all your baggage with you. The beating heart is all things, repository of memory, cache of wounds, timekeeper. Sometimes it is an oracle too. The next section is called Living Together, and it's called Living Together, Crafting Place from Layers of Memory. And I have to say, I have to thank Nancy Adajania for this phrase. She wrote it in the curator's note to Sudhir Patwardhan's exhibition that she curated. And it just stayed with me, and I asked her if I could use it. The comment is by Urvashi Butalia. So thank you, Nancy, and thank you, Urvashi. At first glance, each story in this section is very distinct, a standalone. This isn't surprising. The writers come from different locations, languages, time periods, ages. Yet, there are ways in which their settings and characters resonate with each other, and in a series of sometimes oblique associations, the more so when read together, the memory of one floats closer to the surface of the other. The connections are by no means immediately apparent, yet in strange ways, departures, losses, whether of home, country, friendships, currency, a cellmate, even a piece of sky, or simply a sense of belonging to something, however unpleasant, animate these stories. And finally, we have perhaps the most brutal section in the book, which is called Reality Imagine. And there's a comment by Rakshanda Jalil, and she starts, George Lukács, 1885 to 1971, the noted Marxist intellectual observes that a writer's awareness can be subdivided into awareness about reality, critical awareness about reality, and socialist awareness about reality. These categories have also been described as realism, critical realism, and socialist realism. Lukács developed a most coherent theory of realism, which starts with the dogma that all literature is a reflection of reality. In any case, one may or may not agree with that statement, but it resonates. And so that's the sections into which this anthology is, the stories are divided. And yes, so let's continue talking about how each of you read those sections. Perhaps that might be a good place to begin our conversation.
Yeah, like I said, Indira, I didn't take the sections too seriously, though I did like the names you've chosen for them. They did create little mysteries because you didn't say love and war and caste. And those are some of the underlying themes. They were poetic, let's say. They were poetic categories. So they did interest me, but like I said, I was curious about the stories themselves, and so I read them in a somewhat disorderly fashion. But I think what's interesting is that it is somehow representative, I think, this anthology of the short story today in India. I think you could safely say that because you have not, I mean, I don't know if I would use the word definitive or any sort of exaggerated praise for an anthology in which I feature myself, but it did feel that there is a sense of range, definitely. There are contemporary writers writing in English, older writers, and a very strong, I think, translated bunch of stories. So you have multiple languages, you have a sense of contemporariness, but also of history. I mean, you have Krishna Sokti's story, which is the first she wrote, written in 1948, published in that same year. Much older writers from the languages, Gangadhar Gadgil, to name one, Dalpat Chauhan, to name another. So I was kind of taken with that sort of picture that's emerging from this sort of very different um, coming together of these very different stories. And I think if one were to generalize, and again, of course, one is doing it on the basis of a couple of dozen. How many are there in total? I'm not sure, but
30
yeah,
stories.
yeah. So any generalization comes with its risks, but one does, when one reads an anthology, try and formulate some sort of conclusion about what is this thing saying together between the covers. And what I thought, I don't know if you agree or what Fehmida thinks, but it seemed to me that there were sort of two interesting themes emerging, which were sort of in a tension with each other, and related to freedom. And it seemed to me that the question was, what do you do with characters who don't have agency, who don't have enough agency, who are the subjects of either caste violence or violence because of their gender or violence or some kind of oppression to do with religion? What happens to characters like that in a story? How can they act when it's already sort of obvious, it's preordained in a way that the odds are stacked against them? And you keep coming across this kind of scenario. There are at least a couple of stories to do with caste violence. um, there are there is Annie's ID story you just mentioned, about an abused woman. There's Shabnam Vaidy's story also about abuse. And again, like I said, I haven't read all. There may well be more examples, but I started seeing a pattern between the victim, the character as victim within quotes, uh, and so where is the agency going to come from? Where's the creative movement in the story going to come from if the character is so beaten already? I felt that with Dalpat Chauhan's story as well. Ajay Navaria's very powerful story about a very, very self-possessed woman, but again, bound to be beaten down, it feels, because she's caste. And even though Annie's story has, for once, has the victim in the stronger position, it still felt like the odds are stacked against her in general. She just gets lucky that one time, and is able to beat down her opponent or her abuser. But generally, in the society in which she lives, that's not going to be the outcome every time. So yeah, so to me, it was interesting. It's not a question to which I have an answer, but how do you write fiction about situations, and very, very Indian situations, obviously, where agency is so limited? So that's one end. And I think at the other end, you have these characters who have limitless freedom, who are free to make what they want of their lives. Um, and the one example that comes to mind immediately is Tanuj Solanki's story about a couple just talking. And she is preparing to go to the United States for a year to study, and he's not sure whether she should, but he doesn't want to stand in her way. And that to me seemed like a discourse on freedom, because they both are free really to do what they want, but also afraid of that freedom. They're both afraid of that freedom. And so, yeah, so there are any number of examples one can take of how that freedom is used or abused, or put to creative uses in the fiction. So those were the two things that I was thinking of. I don't know what you feel, Fehmida, if you agree with that characterization of the book.
I too haven't read all the stories. I have tried, and I have gone through section wise. Like, in the sense, I have read at first. First, I read all the introduction by different writers, and I went through, and the first section that I finished was the reality imagine one, because there were a lot of translations there, which I found very interesting, and so I started reading that. And yes, what I did find was the victim kind of characters, like the writers were bringing the reader into the dangers that their characters were going through, and yet for some reason, even when they were aware of the danger, the main characters were not given a sense of what is happening to them. It seems as though they are being kept in the dark, and and it's only later that they come to know about that. And as a reader, you really were being pulled into the story, and you really wanted to go and tell the character, be careful, don't do this, or be careful about that. So I felt that strongly in the story, in that section especially. And when it came to Annie's AD story, Sujata, again we find the same thing, but there the character is much more stronger, and it's almost there is also that sense of a humor. It's lightened. Even though the issue that she's talking about, the violence, the abuse, and that she's gone through, the character's gone through, there's also a strain of humor in the whole thing, which is sort of which is very welcome, but at the same time only seems to make it even more pronounced, the abuse that she may have suffered and how she tries to get out of it. And again, even Altaf Tarwala's Mischief in Netanagar, I found was, it is talking about a big thing, but again, it is done in a very there is a strain, a vein of humor running through, which I felt sort of made it all the more poignant, and also all the more interesting, because it's quite difficult to insert humor into stories, especially when you're talking about really really tough topics, like that are really difficult to take. But when there is the strain of humor, it sort of makes it um, uh, it sort of lightens the whole mood, and at the same time makes it more poignant. Even in Baba Baglu's, also in and even in that, you find that the writers talking about really very very deep issues. But in when by portraying Baba Baglu's as someone who is unable to run away even when he is given a chance, it also speaks about the character and about the choices that he has and he's not taking in. So yeah, I do feel that the anthology has stories, has tackled really tough issues and really tough themes, and I think they all come together, and I really found it very interesting. All the stories together, they seem to be connected in one way or the other, with more than the place or more than the nationalities of the authors. The stories themselves seem to be flowing from one to the other. I mean, it wasn't standing out, like, in a sense. Yeah.
Oh, thank you for that. I mean, it was difficult, actually. I've always been fascinated by how collections or anthologies are put together. And I remember once coming, when I first started writing, and I got a collection of Raymond Carver stories. And there was a possibility of buying like collected works, massive volume. But I wanted to buy them in the little collections as he had published them, because for me, I was curious as to how you put them together and how you create a kind of a coherence or a voice in the collection or anthology itself. Yeah, so I appreciate that. I liked your comment, Anjum, about the fact of the freedom versus the restricted freedom versus the limitless freedom. But in a way, I didn't see Tanuja's story quite only like that. Yes, they're both entitled and have enough agency in their daily lives, but the psychological oppressions and pressures that they feel are also restrictors to that freedom, right? Oh, your lights have come back on.
Yes.
And so, that in a sense was interesting too. The other story, which is similar like that, which also has a lizard in it, is Azra Abbas's story, which was translated by Daisy Rockwell. I don't know if either of you had a chance to read that. But there in it, you have this observer creature, which has no freedom, has no limitation. It is just watching this party, and then suddenly it's a little lizard and it loses its grip and it falls and is sort of then a victim after that. So it's a very interesting idea, that of freedom and agency and how you make use of what you have. And so, yeah.
No, I haven't. I don't think I haven't read that one. I should go back and have a look at it.
Yes.
But what I was thinking is that I think so much depends on the writer's manner of speaking, manner of writing, style, where the emphasis is put, the perspective. Because I think there could be two stories where the characters are equally constrained. One may be, like Fehmida said, humorous, and I would like push that a little further to say it can even be subversive. And I think you see that in the Baba Baglu story. Is it called Baba Baglu, or does it have a different name? I'm just
Baba Baglu. Yeah.
Mustansar Hussain Tarar. That's correct.
So it's an incredible story, really. Also,
and that is about extreme control. I mean, talking about victims and agency, there's no way of escaping the sort of the limitations that are put on the characters there and the torture that they're undergoing. And yet you have this innocent figure at the center of it who seems almost oblivious of what's going on. And so I think, to me, that's an example of a story where your characters have no agency. There's a dictator who's torturing everyone to death. And yet you're able to create this little island of innocence. And it's not as if the character himself knows he's innocent, but the reader does. And that sort of subverts the whole cruelty that he's surrounded by. So I think it really depends so much on where you're placing the emphasis as a writer, and how you can thereby subvert what very oppressive social circumstances. And I think some writers are able to do that better than others. But in terms of the absolute freedom, the idea of absolute freedom, that's the classic modernist situation, right? Like, you have all the freedom in the world, but you don't know what to do with it, and how to live authentically, what choices to make. And that's why, to me, Tanoj's stories seem like a classic existentialist story, because we could do anything, and therefore we are afraid to do anything. Which is absolutely not the case with the stories where the choices are obviously much more limited. But I, as a sort of motto for the existentialist in these stories, I thought Kuzhali Manickavel's story is delightful, and I really like her work. And this one I hadn't read before, but again, there's a sense of unlimited freedom in her stories. The characters are constantly inventing themselves, but that doesn't necessarily make them super happy or fulfilled. There's a sense of bleakness and very, very strong melancholy, I think, in her stories. And at some point she says in this Dolphin King that the hero is someone who knows he's going to be fucked, but he still acts heroically. And to me, that seems like a great motto, sort of a principle out of which to act. She's quoting, or she's not quoting, but she's paraphrasing character from the Mahabharata, Karna. And
Yes.
she says he acted heroically even though he was doomed. So
Yes.
to me that seems a very interesting position to take as a writer, and it seems to me that that's what some of the stories at least seem to be exploring.
Yes, yes, Kurali's is remarkable in that sense because I think also she creates that sense of loss and floating kind of. Although the characters have identity, they're kind of floating in a social miasma, sort of many times. You know, there's another one in the first issue that we published where again the characters are somehow lost, you know, and yet they know who they are, and yet they don't. It's quite a remarkable ability to express that. I loved both your stories that have, oh well, all of your stories that have. Both your works that have appeared in out of print. Anjum, yours is in the anthology. Fehmida's, two of yours are in the magazine. And then, you know, I was just saying to you earlier, I discovered that the first story of yours I had worked with was in the anthology Pangea that I published with Rebecca Lloyd, and we worked that together called Shuttered Landscape. Yeah, those are really all remarkable stories. So tell us a little bit about your work, each of you.
Fehmida, why don't you go on?
So when I saw this, my book that my anthology that my collection of stories that I'm bringing out, it has stories that I worked on in the beginning when I first started writing, and most of it is based in my hometown in Kerala, and some of it in Chennai, which is also home. So what I was trying to do, like at first when I was writing, was to write about the people around me and in locations around me, in houses and towns, and that speak to me about home, and I was trying to write about why would someone do this, or why would someone do that. It's all kind of inward looking, like most of my stories if you look at Shuttered Landscape, and you would see that it is like that. It's about a young bride who's about to get married, and she's thinking about the choices in her life. So that's what, like, mostly my stories start with that. Why would someone do this, or what if they had made this choice, or what if they had made some other choice. So that's a starting point mostly for the stories. And one of the stories which came out in Out of Print, which was in the gender and sexual violence issue, was regarding the concept of people coming from Arab countries and marrying girls from underprivileged homes, and then either leaving them or taking them there, and then again they're not in a very good situation. And I happened to see something on television, a story, something that had happened, and I was so surprised that it was still happening. And that's how that story came out to be. And I wrote it in the form of a diary entry that the girl is keeping, rather than the usual how my stories are, like a narrative text following. So and I was very happy when Indra chose it for your gender and sexual violence issue, because it is very different from what I usually write.
Yes, very true. But I think you always still create a flavor of community and community support and community injustice in a way, through your stories. And the fact that even your loved one or your respected one has a complete lack of understanding of the main character and her trajectory. So that I think is a very interesting way in which you work with your work. I would love it if you did a reading from any one of those stories, or some other. But Anjum, did you want to speak first, or shall we have Fehmida read a little?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Yes.
So I'll read. I'll read from that story called A Season of Premature Twilight. I'll just read two paragraphs from that. This year, the monsoon has been especially heavy. Showers through the night that continue into the day, curtaining the sun, graying out the landscape. A season of premature twilight and thunder filled darkness, a moisture filled cocoon of growth. The path to the door, covered by a green skin woven with the tapering leaves of creeping vines, a breeding ground for the insect world, remains undefined in spite of our footsteps. We covered the broken glass that still hangs in the window panes with cardboard, torn out from our notebooks, fearing an invasion of snakes and scorpions. Then there is the roof, pyramid shaped, covered with ancient tiles, resting on a rotten wooden frame. A month ago, the rain finally found its way to our rooms, slipping past broken tiles, trickling in through the sagging ceiling. The trickle turned into a torrent, and the management decided to shift the girls to the storerooms at the back. Some of the girls thought we would be moved to the boys' building. It is newly built and has unoccupied rooms. But of course, that was wishful thinking. In our orphanage, where boys and girls do not even share classrooms, there was no way the management was going to houses in the same building. 40 girls packed inside two rooms, to the mosquitoes buzzing at night. Our sleeping bodies might as well be one giant creature with several arms spread out over the floor. Not that it matters to them, they just want our blood.
Yes, thank you. That's a fine line to end on.
Yeah,
Mosquitoes don't create distinctions.
yeah.
Yeah, Anjum. Go ahead, Fehmida, sorry.
Yeah, so I was trying to create that sense of how the girls always have a secondary place, and how anyone can just come and pick them out, and take them away, draw their blood, kind of, so that is the
Yeah.
whole idea behind the description over there.
Speak of lack of agency, right?
Yes, yes, the lack of agency, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I suppose fiction is necessary, therefore, to give voice to those without. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I think that's what I forget who has written that. Like, the fiction is reality. I mean, and reality literature does reflect reality. And I think as writers, that is what we try to do, to bring out reality, maybe in more shocking terms than we see outside, so that it can shock you into taking note of it, kind of.
Yeah. Anjum. I love
Yeah.
that story.
Yeah. So this was in a very early edition, I remember, of Out of Print. I think you were just one or maybe the second
Yeah.
one. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's written fairly long ago. I wrote it about 10, 11, no, more than 10. Can't be 10. It must be 11, 12 years ago. And it's one of my continual preoccupations, which is art, and how do you write about art in fiction. And of course, the only way to write about art, about anything in fiction, is through human beings and their problems and complexities and foibles. And my character is somebody who likes to believe that you can be an artist for yourself. You don't have to necessarily share your art in order, or make your art public in order to be an artist. And the story asks what happens when that is confounded, and her art sort of is pulled into the world, and she's pulled in after it. And basically the terror of that, the sheer fear, I think, of having to present yourself as an artist to the world. That's what the story is about. And yeah, it's also, I think, about one's relationship to travel, and to feeling that the world is yours for the taking. I mean, This character is an older woman. She's a widow. She lives in Bangalore. She paints for herself, and she suddenly has to go to Europe. It's the first time she's traveled abroad. But what sustains her, what keeps her going, is the thought of all the great male artists who, the great male European artists who she admires. And I think what I was trying to do is sort of set up that contrast between these artists who who felt and who feel that the world is there for the taking and who can go out and grab it, and this woman. I don't want to call her a poor woman because she has agency, I think, to some extent, at least to try and define herself in relation to this world that terrifies her so much. And the way she does it, of course, is through art. But I'll just read the first couple of paragraphs. The name of the story is The Big Picture. It is possible to feel completely at home in the world, but this is only because we have laid claim to a small space, a few rooms, certain streets, a familiar town, over which our habitual wanderings create grooves that we can comfortably slip into. In truth, the world is a strange and horrifying place, as Mrs. Ali discovered when she boarded a plane for Europe to participate in the opening of the exhibition in which her paintings were to feature. It started on the plane. On being asked if she wanted lime with her tea, she smiled and reached her a slice from the bowl that the steward held out. He jerked away as if bitten. Tongs, please, he admonished, and Mrs. Ali dropped the slice back in shame and confusion. She worried about the incident while the other passengers fell asleep around her. Surely she was in some fundamental sense uncivilized if she could not make the connection between a pair of tongs and a slice of lemon. She thought of her husband and wished he weren't dead so she could blame him. As things stood, she only had herself to blame. She took silent revenge on the steward by imagining him ignorant of much about life too. The paintings of Pablo Picasso, for instance. I'm going to Europe to see the paintings of Pablo Picasso, she thought. The ring of that sentence comforted her, and she grew drowsy. The man next to her snored in exactly the blaring way Mr. Ali used to. Every time she drifted off to sleep, she woke up anxious from the dream that she had confused this man with her husband and leaned her lolling head on his shoulder. Thank you.
Thank you. You really sort of sympathize and feel connected to Mrs. Ali's various small predicaments, which are so indicative of her major anxieties. I think, speaking of agency, hang on, I'm going to tell Jai not to turn on the water. Jai, do you mind not turning? So yes, the thing, speaking of agency, in a way, she takes charge of herself, right? This has become the theme now. Anjum, you set the theme with agency. She takes charge of herself, right? She doesn't have agency and she's frightened by the world, but she has a sense of herself which comes through so strongly, and the sense of why what she does matters. And I think that's very that makes you terribly sympathetic to her as a reader.
I think that's very well put, in sense of why what she does matters. But it also struck me that there are stories in the anthology where the characters may not be completely free to do what they want, and it's a fairly constrained, sort of narrow domestic or otherwise social setup. But again, because of the writer's style or where he puts the emphasis or she puts the emphasis, the character or the whole situation somehow is redeemed. And I'm thinking, for instance, of Gangadhar Gadgil's lovely little story.
Exactly.
Where there's this absolute battle axe of a mother-in-law, and then there are 3 sons and 3 daughters-in-law, and it's like warfare over the course of a single day. But because this girl, through whom the story is being told, is so lively, and so alive.
Yes.
What could have been a very oppressive story, critical of mothers-in-laws or daughters-in-laws or whatever, what have you, it becomes just a picture of life. Um,
Yes.
I think that's I guess what I was trying to get at, that
Yes.
uh, like we said earlier, fiction helps us to uh, show up reality.
Yes.
But how do we show it up? Do we always do we exaggerate, or do we sublimate in a way? And I think what Gadgil is doing here is sort of sublimating it into something very, very not not over sweet, but still, well, bittersweet is the name of the story. So
Yes.
so
Yes.
yeah, so I think that's very interesting to me as a writer, to see how other writers do that, how they,
Yes.
talk about our reality, but it really all really depends on the style and the emphasis.
And the skill and the craft and the sort of mind, what the writer's thinking and striving for at that moment. But I like the Gangadhar Gadgil story also very much, because in the end I feel that she also, there's also that flirtatious relationship she has with her husband, and in the end she owns it, right? So that's I think it was so lovely, because she makes him laugh, and then I don't know, it just is a wonderful story.
She's
The
able
other
to stand up to she's able to stand up to her mother-in-law and to her brothers-in-law, and also the younger sister-in-law, who's as
and,
overbearing as her mother-in-law.
yes, and play the game.
Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. It's
yeah,
an absolute
It's a
game.
beautiful story. It is, yeah.
It's an
yes.
absolute game, and there's this other story. Oh, I can't recall the name, about this woman who's seen like 45 men and no one wants to marry her, or maybe
Oh, that's a brilliant
Yeah,
story.
yeah,
Annamantiram, yes.
yes, yes.
The reincarnation of Chamunda. It's a very good
yeah,
story too. Yes, yes.
that's very, very interesting in its own way. But there, the emphasis is on a sort of on the tragic note, rather
Mm,
than playing the game,
Yeah, yeah.
because she's not really able to make it into a game. It becomes bleaker and bleaker,
Mm-hmm.
and more depressed in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Even while she's able to create these very interestingly idiosyncratic characters, everyone seems to be wildly eccentric in
yes.
that story. So that's another way of doing it, I guess.
Yes, and that sense of displacement, they're all displaced. I felt that they all are not grounded anymore. It's so bizarre and freaky.
Well,
Everyone,
they're so it's about India. It's about India in a very overt way, and yet it's set in America, from what I can tell.
yes,
Uh,
yes, yes.
so that partly
Mm.
creates a sense of weird dislocation, I think.
Yes, yes, exactly. That hanging on to your some kind of root or identity or way of
Yeah,
life that no longer has
Absolutely.
any sort of
Yeah.
sense. Yes. I'm
yeah.
just going to check if we have. I'm going to ask anyone in the background, uh, Divya or Nirika, if we have any responses or questions. Oh, I see one on the YouTube chat which says, "Dear Anjum, your story is stunning, and I read it in one afternoon and I was completely free and lost in her world." So that's wonderful. But we don't seem to have any other responses as far as I can tell. But I have no idea if I'm streaming in time. So yes, so we'll just have to. Oops! Oh, sorry. My dog and my cat are having a little encounter. All right. With the rain, the dogs come in, so there's not much option. I thought that we would we're coming to a close, I think. And I was thinking about ending with a reading. And I thought about Mischief in Nathanagar, since you brought it up, Fehmida, because I think it's also a very clever story and a very clever
Yeah,
commentary on meaning of democracy.
yeah,
So I am going to just read that a little bit from it.
yes.
Mischief in Nathanagar, Altaf Tyrewala. Altaf, thank you for the story. They say this is a democracy, full freedom, do what you want, live piss, eat, sleep, wherever you wish. It is 9:30 a.m. If I were a regular sort of guy, I'd be leaving for work. Instead, I'm at home in the loft of my 20 by 20 shack on the outskirts of the world's largest slum, in the world's soon-to-be most populous city. I'm watching TV. Below the loft, in the room that serves as a living room for my wife and our 5 children, my family is eating breakfast. I'm in no mood to descend from the loft. I am in bed. I've been watching the cricket match since 4 in the morning, India versus Pakistan. The second inning is on. Pakistan is batting. The Indian team scored okay. The Pakistanis seem set to win. I want this match to never end. I don't care who wins, India or Pakistan. I don't care. Till the match lasts, I don't have to think about anything else. Our slum gets free electricity. In exchange, we have to vote en masse for a politician. Thanks to this slum, that politician has a seat in the Legislative Assembly for 10 years in a row. Our slum also gets free water and free phone connections, and none of us have to pay rent, ever. To feed and clothe my family, I borrow money on zero interest from a bank owned by the aforementioned politician. We call this Netanagar, the politician's settlement. Neat, yeah? So I move on to the end of the story, towards the end of the story. So Pakistan has won the match, and he sets forth a burst of firecrackers, and he says, I start giggling. In a country still mourning its loss of face in a far-off land, these will be the only explosions of celebration, and they will not go unpunished. I wonder where the retribution will come from, the neighboring Shiv Sena branch or the adjoining Dalit-ridden Mangalnagar. Our patron politician will have to bend backwards to save his Netanagar from turning into a battleground. Worried faces poke out of the next-door shacks. I continue to smoke my beedi while contemplating the scene from the slit in my window. India lost. Pakistan won. Democracy, no? Fatak, boom. So, I thought it was a very clever story, really. And as you said, Fehmida, he manages to create this lightness in the telling, which is great.
It makes it all the more. It makes it all the more poignant in the sense it makes it. I mean, you just think like it's so easy to create problems. It's so easy to bring trouble to your doorstep.
Yes. And he does it because he's just in the mood for mischief that day.
Yeah, that's all. Yeah. It's as simple as that.
But that mood for mischief, you can see, comes from a weight of frustration and lack of agency.
Exactly.
Lack of agency, and also the ease with which people respond to trouble. I mean, how easily we are offended and take offense and are waiting to be our sensibilities to be hurt.
Yes.
That too, I think.
Yes. Yes. Well, I have to say that when I started putting the anthology together, I thought it was going to end up being an anthology of women's work initially. Almost all the works I first shortlisted for the anthology were by women. And then slowly, somehow, it came together. I haven't thought about the gender aspect, but I know there's a sort of a gender balance. But women are writing powerful works, as are men, and young people are writing powerful works. And so I'm so happy that that I'm able to provide a platform for short fiction from the subcontinent and connect it to. Please go out and buy the anthology. It is available on the Champaka bookstore, www.champaka.com. And thank you, Anjum. Thank you, Fehmida. Really, it was such a pleasure to talk to you about the anthology and about your work. And thank you for setting the tone with agency, Anjum. You set us on the path.
I'm still thinking about it. But yes, I really enjoyed this, and I have to say that it's very well edited. The language has clearly been worked on, and that's more than you can say for a lot that's published. So thank you for that. And yeah, I enjoyed talking to both of you very much.
Yes.
Thank
So
you.
good
Thanks
luck
for
with writing. Fehmida, good luck with the new anthology and collection coming out. Anjum, waiting for you to return to short fiction.
Yes, so am I. Okay.
nice talking to both of you, Anjum
Yeah,
and Indira. Thanks a lot.
thank you. And thank you, Champaka, wherever you may be in the ether.